Hey, everybody. I am excited to have my friend Hal Garyn with me here today. And we're going to be talking about a really important topic that if you're a chief audit executive, you're going to want to hear. And that is about executive presence and how important it is as a chief audit executive to have executive presence. And as I said, when you listen to this, you're going to realize how important it is, and we'll give you some tips on how you can increase your executive presence. So, with that, let's get started with the episode.
Hi, I'm Jason Mefford, and you're in the right place to start transforming your career and life with this podcast. I've been in the trenches as an executive leader, and now I'm an executive coach and confidential advisor to executives all over the world. I use a multidisciplinary approach to improve learning that drives transformation by getting to the root cause in a practical, no-nonsense way. I love learning and sharing what makes people tick. You get both education and entertainment, since learning shouldn't be boring, right? But that's enough about me. This podcast is a combination of intuitive leadership, neural influence, and mental mastery to take your career and life to levels you've never thought possible. If you're wanting to improve yourself, develop stronger relationships professionally and personally, make quicker, better decisions, and become a more effective leader, then of course, this podcast is for you because you are going to learn how to manage emotions in yourself and others, avoid burnout, stress, and anxiety, master your mind, get people to listen and take action, and become a lifelong learner. And when you do that, you will have a positive mental attitude, executive leadership presence, and the skills to know exactly what to say and do in any situation. I'm glad you're here. So, let's get started.
Well, hey, Hal, I am excited today to talk to you about something that both of us, this term of executive presence, right, that we've been talking about for a little while. And so, welcome. And
Great
let's
to be here.
let's let's just kind of get in first off, because in case that term might be a little unusual to some people, let's just kind of start off maybe talking to people about what is executive presence, right? So that they can understand what it is that we're talking about. Then we'll show how what or why that is important, right?
Yep. So it's an intangible. If you think about, at some point in time in your career when you were starting out or developing in your career, and an executive, someone who was high up in the organization, stopped by the meeting you were in, walked by the cube, things felt different. You didn't know exactly what it was, but there was this air about the person. And it was this intangible about the presence. There was something special about them and how people felt about them in the organization. They were respected, looked up to. If they had something to say, they were listened to. And it is something that it extends beyond position or position title. It's an intangible presence or a feel.
Well, so let's some other words maybe that people might have thought about, because I think that example that you just gave is great, right? Because again, all I'm sure all of us, right, have felt that at one point in their life. Somebody walks into the room and there is something different about that person.
Mhm.
Like you said, people respect him, they listen to him. Another word that I've heard is, oh, he or she is charismatic, right? Is I think another word sometimes that, because like you said, it's this intangible. We don't quite know what it is, but we feel something different, right? And I've experienced this with lots of people, where you can just almost like feel their power, or feel their love when you're talking with somebody, right? And so that's really kind of what we're talking about here with this executive presence, right?
Yes, and if you think about it when it relates to the internal audit position and someone who is aspiring to or is currently the chief audit executive, it's not that you want to wield power. It's not that you want to have everybody genuflect when you have something to say. It's not about that, but it is about influence. And you want to be able to influence the organization from the power of what you have to say, because you strongly believe in your views and what you have to relate as with regard to the organization. And people will listen to you if, as the chief audit executive, you can exude, for lack of a better term, this intangible known as presence as an executive. You look at the fellow executives you have in the organization, and you could immediately think, yeah, they've got it. Yeah, they've got it. Yeah, they're a project in process. They don't have it. And then you think about how you interact with them, how you see the organization interact with those individuals you've bucketed, and which group you want to be in.
Mm-hmm.
We got to make sure you put yourself there as a CAE.
Well, and it's interesting that you say that, right? Because again, it's like, I've been in meetings like this where there's different people, right? One person opens their mouth, and all of a sudden, like you said, genuflect. I love that. That's a $10 word, Hal. So thank you for bringing that into today's episode, right? But they defer to that person, right? I mean, when they open their mouth, everybody shuts up and they look at that person and they're actually listening, right? And you can feel that, you can sense that, versus other people open their mouth and it's like, oh boy, here we go again, here's Jason, right? And all of a sudden people just kind of tune out, right? And as you were saying that, it reminded me, I think it was the financial service firm EF Hutton, but they used to have those old commercials, right? When EF Hutton speaks, people listen, kind of a thing. That's really what we're kind of getting to, or wanting to get to, aspiring to get to, because again, if you're the chief audit executive and you're opening your mouth, you want people to listen, right? So what are some things that people have to do, I guess, to develop this more, or maybe how can, maybe we'll go down there because we're trying to keep this a little bit shorter of an episode too, but maybe how can people develop this more, and how can they really do like a gut check? Because I think a lot of times we feel like maybe we have more of the presence than we actually do if we're really honest with ourselves.
I think it starts with, there's a couple of things that come to mind, Jason, but I think it starts with that. I think it was the title of a book, but it's certainly a well used phrase. I think, therefore I am.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think of yourself as an executive, and you think about the organization as your fellow executives do? Do you use language that is like the executive team uses? Or are you thinking like an internal auditor? You grew up. Now, granted, some people have become chief audit executives and very successful at it by transferring in from another role with no internal audit experience. But the vast majority of internal auditors who become chief audit executives have done it with if not a career, a track record or a history of being in the internal audit profession for some time. You learned how to become a really good internal auditor. You learned how to manage internal audit projects and people and internal audit processes and all of that. And now, as the CAE, all of that stuff is important because it got you to where you are. but it isn't what's going to make you successful in that role right now. What's going to make you successful in that role right now is the executive team and the organization look at you as a leader, an executive with presence. So it starts with what goes on up here. Do I have the self-confidence, and am I aware of and attuned to what's going on around me? How am I perceived? And do I have the self-confidence to handle and carry myself as an executive?
Well, and I think what you just brought up there is one of the important parts, right? Is that self-confidence part, because if and we can tell, right? We can tell when somebody does not really feel confident, and this is where, again, it kind of goes back to the whole you fake it until you make it, right? Because you got to practice. I mean, that's
Right.
part of it, right? But as you're talking, and this is one of the things that I've done for a long time, coaching people as well, right? And getting people to think about, look, it's not necessarily what you do, but how you do it and how you are being, right? Are you being confident? Right. And there's ways to learn how to do this, right? I mean, we've been helping people do this for a long time. There are ways to be, right? And so, for example, being confident, being committed, right, are ways of being.
Right.
And the problem is, most people, we're just focused on the doing, but your doing is only as good as the being who's doing the doing, right? And I know that
Yeah.
it's a little conundrum there,
Yeah.
but I've seen this in people that I've coached forever. I've seen it in, people that I look up to as well. Some of these people that do have that presence, they are being a different person. And therefore, when they do things, people actually notice it, right?
Mhm.
Mm, mm.
Yeah. So I mean, when you went, well, back in the days when we used to walk the halls of the organization, good old days, how did you carry yourself? You know, the executives you, as an example, the executives that you had come to admire and choose to want to emulate, are they the ones who walk down the hall with their head down, not interacting with other people on their way to the next interaction because they're so, rightfully so deep in thought that they seem impersonal?
Hmm. Well,
Or are they the person who walks down the hall greeting other individuals, having conversations as brief as they may be, being approachable, yet still having that air of carrying yourself as an executive? And which one do you want to be? And to me, it really comes down to, again, how do you carry yourself throughout the organization? What impression, every interaction, whether it's the first, the middle of a series of interactions, or the last, every single interaction leaves an impression. Not just what you said or not just what was discussed, but what people think about you as an individual. And so we have to be deliberate about the perceptions that we want to leave behind with people.
yeah, I was going to say, and I think this kind of wraps up. This is going to hit home hard probably for a few people when I say this, because like you said, you're talking about that these interactions leave an impression. We have to be deliberate about what we're doing, but even something as simple as our posture, and again, for a lot of people that grew up in internal audit, we're thinkers, right? And so we tend to be in our heads thinking a lot. I'll find myself, walking, and I joke with my wife that I'm like an absent-minded professor, right? Because I've got things on my mind. I'm working through stuff, right? And I'm oblivious sometimes to everything else that's going on around me. And obviously, when I'm acting that way, other people aren't seeing my power or my presence like that, right? We have to be more deliberate in it. And especially, again, most people in our profession are introverts, and it reminds me of that old joke, right? And usually it's an accountant, but you can use an internal auditor too, right? How do you know the difference between an introverted and an extroverted internal auditor? Have you heard this one?
I'm not
No.
going to steal
Oh,
your thunder,
you're not
but
going to steal my thunder. Yeah. So the introvert is looking at their own shoes, and the extrovert is looking at your shoes, right? And it is because so much of the time we're just heads down thinking, trying to get stuff done. We're doing, and we're not being intentional about, like you said, the impression that we're giving, about being personable to other people, actually being somebody who is likable, as
Mhm.
well, which I think are some good hits. So let's kind of wrap up for this episode, but maybe we can leave people with a couple of things for them to think about. If we summarize a little bit about what we talked about today, right? Is think about not just what you're doing, but who are you being, and how is that being what kind of an impression is that giving to other people? Simple things about your posture,
Mhm.
about how you carry yourself, how you hold yourself, the way that you're talking, right? Because I can be talking like this, or I can be talking like this, right? I mean, even things like the tone of voice that you're using, or the
Yeah.
volume, or other stuff, right? And I like to think, I think you had said before too, is maybe this week is a good time to stop and reflect, right? On how do you think people are perceiving you? Do you have that confidence that you need? If you don't, then again, maybe that's something that you need to work on. And there's ways to work on that. So if you're curious about it, reach out, let us know, right? Because there are actually ways to develop and build this. You're never stuck where you are. That's the whole great thing about personal development as well, right? So, all right. Any final thoughts today, Hal, before we
Yeah,
sign
I would
off?
just suggest that maybe people look at, that are listening to this, take a look at your calendar over the last couple of weeks. We are so busy running meeting to meeting to meeting. And now it may be Zoom call to Zoom call to Zoom call, but it still occupies much of your time. And we might take time in preparation for the content of those interactions.
Hmm.
But do we also take time thinking about what impression do I want to leave? Because I know what I want to say. I know what's on my mind. I know how the meeting is probably should turn out. But do I also add to that what impressions do I want to leave? Look back at your calendar over the last 2 weeks. Reflect on what impressions you think you left with those individuals based on those interactions. And if you don't like it, or you think you could do something different, look at the next 2 weeks you got coming up and be deliberate about that aspect. It is as important as the content when you're an executive. What
Great.
impressions are you leaving, and how do you carry yourself through those things as an executive? And that's all about presence.
Yep. Great stuff, Hal. Great practical stuff as well. And so again, yeah, if you look back to meetings you've had the last couple of weeks, maybe there were some things that you'd like to do different. Don't beat yourself up over it, right? But think about, okay, now in my future interactions, how can I be a little different? How can I manage the impression? And like I said, it's not just the content of the meetings, but it's kind of that context and the impression that you want to leave as well. So, with that, we're going to wrap up for today. But thanks, Hal, for taking time.
My pleasure. Thanks, Jason.
And that's a wrap. Thanks for listening to today's episode of Jamming with Jason. Keep on rocking in the audit world, and if you enjoyed this episode, please share with your friends and leave us a review on your favorite podcast platform. Connect with me on LinkedIn and let me know what you enjoyed the most about the podcast, and you may even be featured on a future episode. When you're ready to turbocharge your leadership development, join the Briefing Leadership Program, where you get access to everything in one place and can interact directly with me in the group. If you'd like to earn continuing professional education for listening to today's episode, head on over to C-Risk Academy's video on-demand learning platform at ondemand.criskacademy.com. Not only do you get a CPE certificate, but you will also have access to hundreds of video on-demand learning opportunities. The views and opinions expressed on this podcast are that of the individuals and not of their respective organizations.